This is the only show in Missouri politics that focuses and is based on first principles, not party politics, not party priorities or cults of personality. Folks, here we understand there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, that incentives matter, and what a policy produces matters more than what was promised. Here it isn't left versus right, right versus left. It isn't red versus blue or Democrat versus Republican. It is the state versus you. Currently, it's warm outside. We're supposed to have storms today. It's going to be an interesting day. The national debt, of course, still $39 trillion, 68 degrees outside, mostly cloudy. So I got my coffee. I'm ready to get started. Got a full show today. I want to talk first about something that I put on Facebook the other day. And this is when I was in Pennsylvania. It was a tweet, a post on X from Thomas Massey, who was reposting something Jack Prosebic, I think that's how you say his name, Prosebic. That's what we're going with this morning. And I just reiterated what Massey and Prosebic both wrote, and that is, end all foreign aid. And you thought that I just dropped a bomb somewhere, because the pushback I got from that, it was swift and very one-sided. I guess I did get some support, but I stand by that. I stand by it absolutely that we should end all foreign aid. Now, the argument against that is that it's a very small percentage of our budget, and it's a useful foreign policy tool. Not to mention, it's just the right thing to do. Is it? Is it the right thing to do? Let's talk about those points for a second. It's the right thing to do. Okay, so what we're talking about here, and there's a minimizing point to this too. It's such a small part of the budget. It's just a little bit of theft and wealth redistribution on a global scale. It's so small. What we're talking about here is someone who gets up early in the morning. Maybe they're a farmer. They got to get out and they got to take care of the cattle. They got to take care of the hogs. They got to get ready for the day. Maybe it's someone who's working at Kawasaki. They're getting up early so they can get their kids fed and out the door so they can go work in a factory all day. Maybe it's someone who's just trying to get along. And they got to go work at a job that they don't want to do, never imagined themselves doing, but they have to go do this. And each one of those people, folks, each one of them will have the product of their labor, a portion of it anyway, a portion of their time, a portion of their effort, a portion of their life. They will have a portion of that taken from them in the form of taxation. So you have people who are working hard, trying to provide for their family, trying to provide for their kids, trying to just keep their head above water. And we're going to take part of that. And then we're going to give that away to a foreign nation somewhere. And we're saying to them, by saying it's just the right thing to do, we're saying we're going to lower the standard of living for Americans, and we're going to give this money to a foreign country to raise their standard of living, because that's the right thing to do. It is what Bastiat would call legal plunder. It's plunder, but it's legal. It's legal theft, because there is a proper role of government, which we talk about, secure and defend the rights of the individual. And you could make the argument that in order to provide those safeguards on your rights, those safeguards on those foundational principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In order to do that, you need a government, and in order to have police, you need funding. And so you could make that argument. And that would not be what Bastiat would call plunder. That is actually the proper role of government. But to take from someone and give to someone else, that's not the proper role of government. Even if it is the right thing to do, it isn't the right thing to do because it's based on coercion, force, theft. So it doesn't matter how big a percentage of the budget it is. It's wrong. Just based on that. Just based on that. But it goes further than that, folks, because foreign aid doesn't do what it promises to do. We just talked about that. What a policy produces matters more than what it promises. Foreign aid is sold as charity, stability, development, compassion. And too often, it actually functions as a transfer from the American taxpayers to foreign governments, ruling families, military cliques, and local cronies. The record of foreign aid is full of projects that have gone over to countries and completely distorted their markets or crushed their local producers. This forced toxic charity of local aid. It subsidizes kleptocrats, subsidizes these rulers who are doing nothing but stealing from the people in their own country and now the people of our country. And it has delayed reforms in those countries that actually create prosperity. I can give you all kinds of examples. There's a story here from Fee by a guy named James Bovard. U.S. foreign aid is jet fuel for corruption. 14 years ago, this was written in 2016. 14 years ago, President George W. Bush promised to reform foreign aid. But U.S. aid programs, which we've seen even President Trump go off against, that's one of his good Trump points. Good job on that. They were continuing to cost taxpayers $40 billion a year to fund many of the world's most crooked regimes, including Uzbekistan, Haiti, and Kenya. Pervasive corruption is a major reason why the Taliban was able to reconquer most of that nation. At Afghanistan's premier hospital during the Obama administration, when we were giving $60 billion in foreign aid to Afghanistan, even though the nation's president admitted his nation was one of the most corrupt countries on earth, we were still giving them $60 billion. At their premier military hospitals, some wounded soldiers starved to death because they could not afford to bribe the hospital staff for food. We were giving them $60 billion a year. I don't know if it was a year. $60 billion since Obama took office. That's a lot of loot. You could say, oh, it's just an infinitesimal percentage of the budget. No, it's $60 billion when we're $39 trillion in debt. Believe it or not, you start throwing around billions of dollars, eventually you start talking about real money there. Much of the Army was practically bootless because of crooked contacts that deliver shoddy footwear that literally fall apart the first time the soldier wears them. That's just one reason why we should end foreign aid, because it goes to foreign countries and it feeds these crooked people who are running the countries into the ground, and they're already stealing from their own countries, and now they're just going to steal from ours. Another reason is it simply doesn't work because it can't. The incentives are wrong. This is from William Easterly, who wrote a great book called The Tyranny of Experts. And he talks about how foreign aid has failed. UK Chancellor Gordon Brown recently gave a compassionate speech about the tragedy of extreme poverty, afflicting billions of people with millions of children dying from easily preventable diseases. He called for doubling foreign aid, a Marshall Plan for the world's poor. He offered hope that by pointing out how easy it is to do good, medicine that would prevent half of malaria deaths cost only 12 cents a dose. A bed net to prevent a child from getting malaria cost only $4. Preventing 5 million children deaths over the next 10 years would cost just $3 for each new mother. However, he was silent about the fact that the West had already spent $2.3 trillion on foreign aid over the last 5 decades and still had not managed to get 12-cent medicines to children to prevent half of all malaria deaths. The West had spent $2.3 trillion and still not managed to get $4 bed nets to poor families. The West had spent $2.3 trillion and still not managed to get $3 to each new mother to prevent 5 million child deaths. The West had spent $2.3 trillion, and children were still carrying firewood to town to sell so they could eat. The tragedy is that so much well-meaning compassion did not bring the results to these needy people because of 2 reasons. Feedback and accountability are misplaced. These aid agencies are not accountable to the people they're helping. They're accountable to their donors. And all you have to do, folks, is put together a good sales package and go back to these donors, and they'll keep giving. Plus, if you solve the problem, you cut your own neck because you cut off your funding. You're not incentivized to solve the problem. You're incentivized to get the next donor. And often, folks, foreign aid makes things worse. Got another article here that shows how international aid failed in Africa and actually made poverty worse. I don't have a lot of time to get into it, but if you really want to help foreign countries, stop sending them money and send them our principles. Send them things like an understanding of how trade works, of how free trade builds the most prosperous countries in history, about the importance of property rights and rule of law, about the need for stable money, of open enterprise, about the importance of private charity. These are the things that will make a difference, not toxic charity and fake compassion in the form of coercion. 7:19, this is the Duane Lester Show. We'll be right back. 7th of 2001, we began our war in Afghanistan following September 11th's attacks. And this was Operation Enduring Freedom. We kicked the Taliban out of Kabul, Afghanistan, very quickly. Very quickly. They were gone by November. And that insurgency continued until we left during the Biden-Harris administration in 2021. And that was a complete mess. That was a complete mess. In the aftermath of the withdrawal, this is from the Foreign Affairs Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee. In the aftermath of the withdrawal, U.S. national security was degraded as Afghanistan once again became a haven for terrorists, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS. America's credibility on the world stage was severely damaged after we abandoned Afghan allies to Taliban reprisal killings. We spent 20 years, folks, fighting a war to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. And then we abandoned the people we had promised to protect. So that's why when I heard this next clip that we're about to play, that it blew my mind that this was going on. I just talked about in the last section how during Obama's administration we gave Afghanistan more than $60 billion. Now we've abandoned Afghanistan. We've left there. We turned it over to the Taliban. And listen to what Representative Tim Burchett has to say.
These NGOs, so-called non-government organizations, have like 1,000 of them. Then you add the United Nations, and it's gotten a little more complex. But it's the kickbacks. You saw it in Minnesota. $14 billion are stealing, and nobody's even talking about it because once again, our messaging stinks. We've allowed the narrative to be changed. We are still sending 40. I saw Secretary of State yesterday at the White House, and he helped me. And now it's moved through the Senate committee. It's going to the Senate floor, and as soon as Leader Thune brings it to the floor, I suspect, and that would be a good messaging bill for Republicans because Democrats are opposed to it. They're opposed to it, and I would think that would be an easy sell. Why are Democrats opposed to $40 million a week of your money going to the Taliban? A week. And I have a memo on my desk from the State Department. Look, I ain't no fan of the State Department. They need to go. But they even said it's over $5 billion that has gone through these transactions. The State Department says that. So
$40 million a week we're giving to the Taliban. Folks, are you ready to end all foreign aid yet? Listen to that. We're giving $40 million a week to the Taliban. Did I mention we're $39 trillion in debt? We're $39 trillion in debt, and we're giving $40 million a week to the organization that's responsible for more than 2,000 American servicemen deaths. Think about that. Around 2,400 U.S. service members were killed in Afghanistan during that 20-year war. And now we're giving that organization $40 million a week. And we're supposed to feel good about it? Folks, we need to end all this. Burchett did not mince words when he pulled back the curtain on where some American tax dollars are going. He described a system that sounds less like foreign aid and more like a revolving door of wasted cash and fraud. Billions are flowing through so-called non-government organizations and international bodies with little to no transparency, and the State Department memo estimated more than $5 billion is sent out, with roughly $40 million a week making its way to Taliban-controlled territory. It sounds good in theory, but when you look at what it is, it's the taking of American prosperity and giving it to the Taliban to the tune of $40 million a week. It's time to end foreign aid, folks. It's just time to end it. 7:30, we'll be back with Paul Curtman right after this. On KNIM. We've been talking about foreign aid all morning. I didn't get a chance to go over this story in the first half hour. I want to touch on it now because this shows exactly why we should end foreign aid. Because we've said before, I keep repeating these things because they're so important. There's what is seen and there's what is not seen. This comes from a guy named Frederick Bastiat. And with every policy, there's what is seen, and that can often be predicted. Oh, we expect to see this, and then you see it, and you put it on the news, and there's what is not seen. So, for example, Tom's Shoes. I don't know if you've heard of Tom's Shoes, but Tom's Shoes, you buy a pair of shoes, and they send a pair of shoes somewhere as charity. And this is often hammered as toxic charity. It sounds great, right? You see the shoes on your feet. You see the card that says, hey, a pair of shoes will be sent somewhere here, and a kid will have a pair of shoes. What you don't see is the destruction to the shoemakers in that country, to the people who are trying to build a business, to build a life in that country. You don't see that. So there's what is seen and what is not seen. And there's a book written by a Zambian economist, Dambisa Moyo, and she wrote a book, Dead Aid, Why Aid is Not Working and How There is a Better Way for Africa. And she has a PhD in economics from Oxford University, a master's in public administration from Harvard Free University, and has worked as a consultant for the World Bank and at Goldman Sachs, where she was head of economic and strategic research for sub-Saharan Africa. This is another article from fee.org. And the main argument of the African Economist text is that the aid destined for Africa, instead of promoting economic growth, condemned the continent to poverty and continued dependence on international aid for survival. She points out that while billions of dollars are received annually by Africa, its nations remain mired in misery. Economic growth is slow. African nations are increasingly indebted, with their country's economy ruined by inflation. This increases government instability, civil unrest, and of course paralyzes social development. Listen to this, folks. Over the last 60 years, billions of dollars in development aid have been transferred from rich countries to Africa. However, per capita income today is lower than it was in 1970, and more than 50% of the population live on less than $1 a day, a figure that almost doubled in 2 decades. And we've seen the opposite in other countries. Paul Curtman's going to join us now, author and former state rep. Paul, we've been talking all morning about foreign aid and the need to end it. How do you react to what Representative Tim Burchett just pointed out, that today we are still sending $40 million a week to the Taliban in foreign aid? How do you respond to that, and welcome to the show?
Hey, thanks, Duane. Yeah, I actually hadn't heard Tim Burchett say that, but that is incredibly, incredibly shocking and disappointing, especially under this administration, because as soon as President Trump, came into office, there was this really large show of force in terms of cutting government waste. We had the Department of Government, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, the drawdown and then final withdrawal from Afghanistan, which left basically one of the largest equipped militaries in the world, thanks to the mishandling of Joe Biden. But now, apparently, if that's true, that we're spending that many million every week, they're clearly also one of the most well-funded, too.
So what Burchett said, for those who didn't hear it in the last segment, he said that billions are flowing through so-called non-governmental organizations and international bodies with little or no transparency. He said roughly $40 million per week is effectively making its way into Taliban-controlled territories. That's American money collected from working taxpayers, ending up in the hands of people who openly despise them and want them dead.
Wow. There's really no other word to say but wow. Thomas Sowell had written a really good chapter, I think in his book, Basic Economics, about how whenever we use foreign aid and we send it through different non-governmental organizations, it doesn't always stay with non-government entities. It always winds up in the hands of government powers, or in the case of Somalia or Afghanistan, in this case, most likely warlords. And so I don't care what the justification is. I don't think there's any justification for that much money to be leaving the pockets of American taxpayers and going to someplace like the Taliban or anywhere in Afghanistan. We shouldn't be spending a single dime in Afghanistan. I mean, if we're going to have that much money there, put the troops back there to guard it. We don't want money going to Afghanistan. We don't want the troops in Afghanistan. I think America is sick and tired of all the foreign aid that's gone out and all the corruption that it's helped breed around the world. And eventually those chickens come home to roost.
There's a lot of economics involved here. We could talk about incentives, like the non-governmental organizations. Are they incentivized to solve the problem, or are they incentivized to get more money? And we see this all the time. There's what is seen and what is not seen. We could talk about that. What you see is foreign aid going out. And we've talked about this before. I remember in the 80s seeing the big bags of rice that were being offloaded in Ethiopia to solve this, and a lot of foreign aid going that way. But what is not seen, that's what's important. What's not seen is the foreign aid that goes to these countries and ends up in the hands of the dictators, like you said. And those dictators, well, then they take that foreign aid and they just dole it out equally to all their people, right? No, they actually just give it to their own cronies, which just solidifies their own power. So very often this foreign aid, rather than helping the people we're supposed to be helping, is helping the people who are terrorizing the people we want to help. And that's one of the biggest problems I see.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when you look at Rand Paul's Festus report, or when you look at former and late Senator Tom Coburn's waste book, you see that we're spending millions of dollars in countries through these non-governmental organizations. Oftentimes, to your point, Duane, it's propped up under the guise of doing something well. But even the idea that we're sending $10 million. Here's a recent one. Pakistan. I remember reading this. I remember Pakistan got $10 million in foreign aid as long as that money was specifically used for gender equality programs in Pakistan. Pakistan's not interested in gender equality. I guarantee that $10 million went someplace that wasn't doing anything to promote equality between the two genders in that largely held, very militant Muslim country.
And this all comes from the arrogance of central planning. This comes from that fatal conceit that Hayek talked about, this idea that if we just have the right bureaucrats with the right funding, we can solve all these problems. But let me throw this at you, Paul. In 1990, there were 280 million people living in extreme poverty in Africa. Okay, we've thrown billions and billions of dollars. This comes from Dambisa Moyo, who's a PhD in economics from Oxford University and got a master's from Harvard and works as a consultant at Goldman Sachs and the World Bank. And over the last 60 years, billions of dollars in development aid have been transferred from rich countries to Africa. Billions. In 1990, there were 280 million people living in extreme poverty in Africa. Today, the figure exceeds 430 million. Okay? Countries like South Sudan and Niger have extreme poverty rates of 90%. 90% extreme poverty. We've sent them billions of dollars. Meanwhile, we've seen India and China rise out of extreme poverty, not through foreign aid, but through more free markets. And that's what we need to be exporting.
You bring up China, and I do think it's interesting. They are definitely central planners. They are a communist form of government, but it didn't take them long to figure out that their economy was not going to progress unless they could allow some competition to some degree or another. Now, the irony there is you still have to be a faithful, quote-unquote, member of the Communist Party in order to have any access to business opportunity in China. But the thing is even they know that central planning doesn't work. Now, you extrapolate that out across the world stage, Jefferson said the natural progress of things is for liberty to yield and for government to gain ground. But if you look at that on a much bigger picture on the world stage, the natural progress of things is for people to constantly think that they can figure things out and plan for everybody else because they think they have all the stuff. Here's a perfect example, Duane. When I was in college, my very first class in a secular university studying political science, the professor said, "Who here can tell us what the purpose of government is?" Now, at the time, I didn't really have a good answer. I didn't really know at the time. But his answer I knew wasn't right. He said, the purpose of government is to help distribute all the necessary resources that people need.
Wow.
That was his answer in the U.S., in an American institution of higher education where students are supposed to study politics and the purpose of government. It never works. The money tells us it's a losing end game.
And you paid for that. You paid for that lesson, or we're using the GI Bill, and we all paid for that lesson.
Yeah, I was on the GI Bill, though taxpayers helped pay for it. But it was also a publicly funded university too. As many of these schools are. So taxpayers were paying the tuition side and the other side too.
When you look at China, when I was writing back in like 2010. I started wondering, is the U.S. becoming more like China and China's becoming the more like U.S.? Because I was watching the moves that President Obama was making at the time that was giving more state control over the economy. And I was watching what China was doing, and they were loosening things up. And so they have these special economic zones there. And it was Deng Xiaoping back in the 80s who made these changes after Mao died. And they have areas that have this allow for almost free market capitalism. Now, I would say China isn't a communist country. I would say they have a state capitalist economy with a party-controlled dictatorship. I don't even know what you would call that because it's not communism when you have areas where you have capitalism. It's a very strange place, really, China right now. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, communism doesn't work. And so it is communism because even if you want to participate in the free market to whatever degree that they'll allow you to participate, you still have to give all your faith and allegiance to this one-party system. So you're not really free. They're just giving you a little bit of extra chain to run with. That's probably the best way to put it. I mean, listen, if you speak out against the party, they're done with you. And let's not forget that they are definitely communist because if you get in trouble, if you go to prison, you're going to a work camp. So much of our stuff that's made in China is made in some of these zones, but a lot of it is also made because of their forced labor programs that they have for people that violated the rules of the party. So communists know, like true communists know, that it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But they still hold on to the communist ideals because that's how they keep their hands wrapped around the necks of the people.
And when you look at India, when you look and compare India to Africa, we were just talking about how international aid has failed Africa. When you look at the countries in Africa, a lot of these countries are ruled by people who went to Western universities, and what did they learn? They learned Marxism and collectivism, and they took that back, and they've just run their countries into the ground. India tried that same experiment with collectivism, and it was the turn towards free markets that actually helped bring people out of poverty. I need to take a break. Can you hold on to the last segment?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. We'll be right back with Paul Curtman discussing foreign aid, capitalism, and how to get people out of poverty. About foreign aid, Paul, I was once written about by a leftist here in Northwest Missouri in a Substack article that was filled with some lies. But one thing that she got right, and this was the hardest thing that she said about me. This was the biggest insult she had, and it made me laugh when I read it. She wrote, "He relied a lot on philosophers." I thought, okay, how's that a burn? I'm okay relying on philosophers. So that being said, let's look at some philosophical frames for why we should end foreign aid. And I'm going to name 4 philosophers, economists: Hazlitt, Hayek, Thomas Sowell, Ron Paul. Hazlitt would say that it's a mistake because instead of looking at the full chain of consequences, we only look at the first effect. And of course, Hazlitt wrote Economics in One Lesson, where he said bad economists will only focus on one point at a time with one point of people. And foreign aid goes a lot further than that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. If it was all just about the first domino to fall after the transaction, hey, that's a lot easier for us to control. But, once you give money to somebody, it doesn't ever stay with them. There's a whole chain of custody with that dollar where it continues to move from one person to the next. And so, once you pass out $40 million into Afghanistan, that money's not coming home.
Yeah, and let's look at it through an even more personal view. Paul, are there people in America right now who can't afford financial planners?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And people need to have this sort of financial security in their later years, and we all know Social Security isn't going to do it, Paul. So we need to have a financial program, a government program, some sort of aid that will pay for financial planners, and they'll be government financial planners. It'll just be free, and they can go to these financial planners. How would that impact you?
If government began to subsidize financial planners, my fee would definitely go up, because now I'm not so much collecting a fee from the people, I would be collecting a fee from the government. And I would also have to raise my fee just in order to weed out I would raise my fee just because I could.
Yeah, but look at it like this, Paul. What if it was this? What if it wasn't that they were subsidizing financial planners, but they were bringing financial planners to town for everyone? And you didn't have to pay.
In that case, I would probably have to lower my fee if the market was suddenly flooded with subpar government-provided financial advisors.
And this is what happens.
It would actually be bad for the economy in this industry.
This is what happens in foreign countries. When we flood places with like rice or grain, it destroys the farmers there. Why would you go farm all day when we're just going to throw busloads and truckloads of grain and rice? Who's going to buy from you? No one is. And so you've got to look past step one. That's one of the more disastrous impacts of foreign aid. Hayek would say this is a knowledge problem. Can you help me understand, Paul, what the knowledge problem here would be?
The knowledge problem, Duane, at the very basic level, is people don't have an understanding of how economics works, how demand and supply works. They don't understand that when you have a third party that enters the demand and supply dynamic, it's going to shift and create a misrepresentation of what the true demand is or the true supply, and that is going to throw off everything from the cost to the how much quality you get from the service you're looking for.
Exactly. And think about this, Paul. When you were down in Jeff City, could you tell what the people in Maryville, Missouri needed, what our local conditions were, what our customs were, what our informal institutions are? Did you know any of that from Jeff City to Maryville? No. You couldn't know it. So how are we supposed to know what those are in Africa? We don't know those things. And no one can. No one person can. And that's one of the great conceits of collectivism and central planning. I didn't have time to get to Sowell, who would say compared to what, or Ron Paul, who would say, why is it the federal's job to take money from American taxpayers and transfer it to foreign states? These are all fantastic questions, Paul, but we're out of time. We don't. Again, we could probably sit here and just talk for hours about this stuff, but we are out of time. Thanks for being here, man. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Wayne.
Yep. 7:58. This is the Duane Lester Show. We'll be right back. Thanks for being here. I reported on this last month. The House, on March 4th, the House voted to scuttle an effort by Republican Representative Nancy Mace to shed more light on sexual misconduct allegations against members of Congress. So, Nancy Mace is a conservative Republican from South Carolina. She wanted to make public all reports on allegations of congressional lawmakers and aides engaging in sexual misconduct or harassment. Make it all public. That went down. Not because they killed it. What they did was they had a procedural maneuver where they voted to send it to the Ethics Committee. So they can come back and say, we didn't kill it, we sent it to the Ethics Committee, which is it effectively kills it. The Ethics Committee had already said they were going to not do it. Republican and Democratic leaders of the committee argued that, quote, it could chill victim cooperation and witness participation in ongoing and future investigations. And it would make it harder for the committee to investigate and eliminate sexual misconduct in the House. Here and elsewhere, perpetrators of sexual misconduct should never be shielded from responsibility for their misdeeds, but to be re-traumatized by public disclosures. Well, that's wrong. They were against that. And witnesses who often speak to the committee confidentially or on condition of future anonymity could fear retaliation if their cooperation was made public. Two people who were there for that vote were Tony Gonzalez, representative from Texas, not the Hall of Famer, tight end from the Kansas City Chiefs, and Eric Swalwell. Gonzalez voted to send it to the Ethics Committee. Swalwell voted not to, which is interesting until you realize that I guarantee Swalwell knew it was a safe vote and had plans on running and wasn't worried about these coming to light. Now, both Swalwell and Gonzalez are resigning from Congress. So, Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell announced this week that he's leaving Congress and the crowded contest for California governor following sexual assault allegations, which he denies, and a swift exodus of his supporters. Days ago, the 45-year-old congressman was among a group of leading Democrats in the race to replace Governor Gavin Newsom, who cannot seek a third term at the helm of the nation's most populous state. Swalwell's campaign unraveled within about 48 hours after the San Francisco Chronicle reported allegations that he had sexually assaulted a woman twice, including when she worked for him. Later Friday, CNN reported that other women accused him of various forms of misconduct. He suspended his gubernatorial campaign on Sunday, saying in a social post, "I will fight the serious false allegations that have been made, but that's my fight, not a campaign's." So he's out. The allegations include sexual assault, nude photos, and explicit messages, and there's video of Swalwell out there forcibly kissing alleged sex workers that he had in what looked like a hotel room. The San Francisco Chronicle interviewed a woman who alleged that Swalwell sexually assaulted her in 2019 when he was her boss, and again in 2024. She said she was too intoxicated to consent to sex in both cases and did not go to police at the time because she was afraid she would not be believed. Swalwell has tweeted multiple times, believe all women, except these women apparently, who he says are liars. CNN reported allegations that appeared to come from the same woman. Neither outlet named her, and her lawyer declined to comment. CNN also spoke to several other women who accused Swalwell of sending them explicit messages and nude photos. Swalwell has maintained that those are lies also. He said Monday it would be unfair to his constituents if he remained in Congress while he's distracted from his duties. It's also convenient that would stop any congressional investigation into it. But He's not alone in there. Representative Tony Gonzalez, Republican from Texas, also announced Monday that he would retire from Congress after bipartisan calls to expel him. Several lawmakers suggested expelling both Swalwell and Gonzalez. Gonzalez had already said that he was going to leave. He is admitted to having a relationship with a staffer, and that staffer later committed suicide. And some folks are saying Swalwell may actually go to jail. D.C. is in full meltdown mode after Swalwell announced on Monday he would resign from Congress amid explosive sexual misconducts. This is from the New York Post. 8/11, folks. We're talking about Eric Swalwell and the folks who are leaving Congress because of all this sexual stuff. The bombshell departure of the high-profile Trump critic came via a somber written statement which Swalwell apologized for her conduct and admitted to mistakes in judgment while still pushing back on the most serious accusations, including an ex-staffer who claimed he raped her. But his attempt to control the narrative quickly unraveled. Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who I'm seeing a lot of, and frankly, I kind of like what I see there. She's getting after it, and she's holding the line, and she's impressive. She's a Republican from Florida. She torched Swalwell in a series of posts on X, making it clear she believes the resignation is just the beginning. Don't you dare say there weren't grounds for your expulsion, because there absolutely were, she wrote. He made the correct decision, but there still needs to be a full-fledged criminal investigation. Based on what I'm hearing, he may go to jail. The Florida firebrand didn't stop there, hinting that more damaging information regarding Swalwell's conduct is set to be made public. In a follow-up post, Luna warned her followers to brace for impact the next day. I'm being told there will be more disgusting stuff coming out. And wow. Tomorrow, a woman who claims to have serious sexual misconduct allegations against Eric Swalwell will hold a bombshell press conference in Beverly Hills. Even Democrats are distancing themselves from Swalwell, including Swalwell's best friend in the House, Arizona Senator Ruben Gallego, issued a blunt reaction on X. I want to be clear, I had no knowledge of the allegations of assault, harassment, and predatory behavior against Eric Swalwell. I trusted someone who I believed was a friend, but it is now clear he is not the person I thought I knew. So they were looking to expel him. In 237 years, only 6 lawmakers have been expelled. Most recently, former GOP Representative George Santos got the boot in 2023. Representative Luna also sent out, Eric, why don't you tell us a little about who was filming the video of the female sex worker? Here's the thing about it, folks. I made a meme the other day of the rent is too high, and it said the number of sexual deviants in positions of power is too damn high, and you're seeing it. It isn't just D.C. We see this in Jeff City. There's stories of it in Maryville, I've been told. Stories I can't tell on the air. It's like these positions of power. I don't know if they corrupt people or if they get there and they were already corrupt. But they seem to attract this. Former Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now here's the thing. This idea that people don't know. I don't believe that. I don't believe that for a second. Because there's what you know and what you can prove. And those are two very different things. There's what you know and what you can prove. Former Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene said Monday she believes more members of Congress are guilty of conduct similar to what Representatives Tony Gonzalez and Eric Swalwell have been accused, Congress is no place for that type of behavior, she said, but I have to tell you, it's a lot more prevalent. I think there are more members of Congress that are guilty of things similar to Congressman Swalwell and Congressman Gonzalez, and we just haven't seen them basically get caught. And that's the key right there. There's what you know and what you can prove. And I had an article here, Andrew Yang, who went up against Swalwell in the, if you remember, there was a time when we had, I don't know, was it when Biden ran, we had like 10 or 12 different people who were out there trying to get the Democratic nomination for president, and Andrew Yang was one of them. Andrew Yang is now on record as saying this is an open secret. This type of stuff that goes on, this is known. But there's also what you know and what you can prove. And that there it is. There's the story. It was from Fox News. So Andrew Yang, again, ran for president against Eric Swalwell in 2020. This is when it was. And Yang slammed Swalwell's career as lightweight, arguing he's not an intellect or a deep policy thinker. And after 2020, Eric became a fixture on cable news, particularly MSNBC and CNN. 2024, when Joe Biden's age became one of the central issues of the day, and Dean Phillips tried to force a primary, Eric was nowhere to be found, despite the fact that in 2020, he challenged Joe Biden to pass the torch and said that the incumbent was too old and out of touch, and it was time to give way to the next generation. So, Yang is out there saying, this is known. This is known. People are familiar with it. Yang, while familiar with Swalwell, but not super close to him, described Swalwell as in way over his head when running for president, and also pointed out that Swalwell's sexual improprieties were, quote, an open secret within D.C. and California circles. So all this pearl clutching that you're seeing, all this I had no idea, take that with a grain of salt, folks. Because even Andrew Yang is saying this is an open secret. And he ran for president for the Democratic Party. They know. And they're either covering it up because they don't want to hurt the party, or they can't prove it, but it is known. This was an open secret. This is the type of stuff that goes on, folks. You would be shocked. Meanwhile, you know who's thinking about running for governor now that Swalwell's out and there's a mess? Kamala Harris creeps in as a potential California governor candidate. There's a text poll asking California voters if they would write in former Vice President Kamala Harris onto the ballot. So, just when you think things couldn't get worse, go from Newsom to Kamala Harris, just stick a fork in California, folks. They're done. 8:19, this is the Duane Lester Show. We'll be right back. Thanks for listening. Appreciate you being here. Donald Trump is still on the hunt. President Donald Trump still on the hunt for a new attorney general. On April 2nd, he told Pam Bondi she was fired, and now he's looking for a new AG. Missouri's Senator Eric Schmitt is in the running. The governor of Missouri is voicing strong support for a fellow Republican to fill the nation's top law enforcement vacancy following reports the lawmaker is on the short list for the president's cabinet. This is from Heartland, the Heartlander, heartlandernews.com. After a U.S. Attorney General position opened up last week with President Trump's dismissal of Pam Bondi, Senator Eric Schmitt's name quickly emerged as a potential replacement. He's a close ally of the president who helped drive the administration's agenda through the upper chamber and wrote a book on how to beat the left in court. Governor Mike Kehoe made it clear during a press conference on Tuesday he believes his former colleague is exactly what the Trump administration needs. Kehoe said, "I worked with Eric for a long time in the Senate. He's done a great job for us, not only here in the State House, but as a U.S. Senator. I'm a big fan of his." Kehoe said he hopes Schmitt receives serious consideration for the nod, pointing to the senator's strong relationship with both the president and the vice president. Kehoe said he's well qualified to do that. He's a firm friend of the law, and he understands what it means to be the top cop in the country. So we'll see. Hopefully it could happen. Now, if Schmitt does leave the Senate for the AG, that would mean that Kehoe would be tasked with appointing his replacement. So I'm sure there's people down there getting close to Kehoe for that. And former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said he'd pick Schmitt. Meadows said, "I would think actually Eric Schmitt would be more of a normal pick, given that he served as the AG in Missouri." The last person to serve in a presidential cabinet from Missouri was John Ashcroft, who was Attorney General under George W. Bush. So, Eric Schmitt leaving the Senate for the AG position? I don't know. I would hope not, because as you've seen, being in the Trump administration is a very short-term deal. You don't know when that's going to happen. You don't know when you're going to find yourself on the wrong side. But there's really only one way, the main way, to get on Trump's bad side, and that's disloyalty. So when you start looking at who else is in the running, who else could be the next AG, you got to take a good hard look at Todd Blanche, who's the acting Attorney General. And he's one of the strongest chances of keeping the job. He demonstrated loyalty to Trump even before he had him in front of. Before working for Trump in this, Blanche was a lawyer at the prestigious law firm Cadwalader, Wickersham, and Taft. And he defended Trump's campaign manager during June and August of 2016, Paul Manafort. You might remember that. And the firm's partners approved of Blanche having Manafort as a client, but they did not approve of him having Trump as a client. And when he heard that, he resigned to take Trump as a client. And that stunned the firm. So here's Blanche, and he's saying, I could stick with this firm or I can go with the president. And he chose to leave and go to the president. And so what you've seen here is loyalty through the years. And that is something that Trump values above almost anything else, is loyalty. There are a couple other names out there that could be the next AG. Not just Eric Schmitt, not just Todd Blanche, but you got Lee Zeldin, who's the current administrator of the EPA. You've got the Harmeet Dillon, who heads the Civil Rights Division. And you got Mike Lee. That wouldn't be a bad choice. A senator from Utah. And Jeanine Pirro, the federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C. I could see that also. That would be the Trump pick that I would expect. 8:30. This is the Duane Lester Show. We'll be right back. Appreciate it. Festus, Missouri, making all kinds of news all over the country. As I said, I spent a lot of time finding the stories for you folks, and Festus is in a lot of different news agencies. Why? Well, this one's from the St. Louis Public Radio. After $6 billion data center plan, Festus voters. There's that dyslexia taking over again. Sorry about that. Festus voters oust every incumbent council member. Now, why? Why did they vote them out? Is it because of the data center, or is it something else? Let's find out. The promise of a political reckoning made by residents opposed to a $6 billion data center proposal in Festus came true Tuesday. This is from April 8th, by the way. As 4 city council members lost their re-election bid, the major shakeup of the council came after months of growing fervor against its members and Mayor Sam Richards over CRG Clayco's plan to build a likely hyperscale data center on 360 acres just north of Highway 67. The 4 council members who supported the development were ousted by 4 candidates who each ran on pro-transparency, anti-data center platforms. The council has a total of 8 members. Dan Moore, who defeated Ward 3 incumbent Bobby Benz, said the data center fight has struck this community to the core and really, honestly ignited a community-driven effort here. People are awake now, and we're not going to let this continue anymore. Additionally, Carl Weekly unseated Jim Collier in Ward 1, Alan Joseph McCarthy ousted Brian Wayner in Ward 2, and Rick Belleville defeated Jim Tinnen in Ward 4. Wayner voted against the most recent ordinance on the development last week, along with fellow Ward 2 council member Stacy Templeton. However, previously the board had unanimously approved several other required steps for the development. The election could serve as a bellwether for elections in areas where data centers are planned, as officials balance the potential for massive tax revenues from the often multi-billion-dollar projects with public pushback. CRG Clayco's Festus project is one of nearly a dozen in the region and is the company's second proposal to meet headwinds from public oppositions. Its previous proposal in St. Charles ended with a year-long moratorium passed by the city. In a previous interview with St. Louis Public Radio, Festus City Administrator Greg Camp described the project as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the city, county, and other taxing districts in the area when it comes to revenue. It's unlike anything that any of these, certainly the city or any of those institutions, have seen before. Now, residents in Festus, they didn't like this, and they filled the town's gym in a last-ditch effort to stop the ordinance creating the rule framework. The residents complained that city officials were not listening to their concerns about the data center. Those complaints reached far beyond the development itself and into transparency concerns over how the city was conducting business with the developer. Moore said transparency issues, the project itself, and a feeling that the council was ignoring citizen complaints fueled 4 new council members' victories. He pointed to a sunshine request that members of the data center opposition group often reference, in which the city officials referred to the group as uneducated. This sounds as much about disrespect and abuse of power in office as it is about the data center. It sounds like the city officials had this coming for their disrespect and their elitist attitude that you see in every level of government, folks. This is in Festus, Missouri, you see this. The city officials of Festus, Missouri referred to their constituents as uneducated. Moore said, "We've been ignored for way too long. It has been a problem in Festus for quite some time. I think this just brought it to the surface." But there is a lot of opposition to data centers out there. I got another article here from Facebook from Elliot Davis TV, and I think I'll give him a follow while I'm at it. Franklin residents are battling to stop the data center projects in their community, and they're going to take a page from Festus residents. Tomorrow they'll be pushing to get the right to vote on this issue from the Franklin County Commission that meets tomorrow morning in Union. So what is the deal with data centers? Why is everybody so upset about them? If you have a reason to oppose them, please give me a call and tell me. 660-960-0959. The lines are wide open. But right now, there's a growing movement in this country to slow down or even stop the expansion of data centers. And it boggles my mind because this is a huge national security issue. This NIMBYism, this not in my backyard. We want access to all these things. We just don't want it near us. That's why yesterday I had nominated the entire state of Kansas to host all of the data centers. I have yet to hear back from the government of the state of Kansas, but I still think they should have something going on over there. You could have the Cozy Inn, you could have the McDonald's in Hayes. Those two are good. And data centers. That'd be the three things. And then the Chiefs. But yeah, just fill Kansas with data centers. But why are people against this? Well, they say they use too much energy and they use too much water and they use too much land. And here's the irony of it, folks. Everyone who's complaining about data centers uses data centers every single day. Most of them use them every single day. They may be using them right now. If you're listening to this through our app, you're using it right now. If you're watching us on Facebook, you're using a data center right now. If you're seeing this on YouTube, you're using a data center right now. You don't hate data centers. You use them every day because every time you send an email, every time you stream a show on TV, every time you use AI or save a photo to Google Cloud or Amazon Photo Cloud, you're using a data center. The digital world people love runs on infrastructure they don't understand. So let's simplify this. A data center is a building full of computers, and those computers store information, they process information, and they basically run the internet. So if you like watching The Boys on Amazon, if you like watching Invincible on Amazon, if you like Netflix, Hulu, if you like any of those things, if you like me, seem to go through the entire MCU timeline over and over and over again on Disney Plus, or you do the same thing with the Star Wars timeline, you use data centers every day. When you use ChatGPT or Netflix or even open your banking app. If you order DoorDash, if you buy on Amazon, you're not talking to the cloud. You're talking to a building somewhere full of machines, full of computers. And the U.S. has about 5,000 data centers already, and about 3,000 more are planned. This isn't new. This is just scaling. This is the way the world works. So let's get into some of these issues. Energy, right? That's the real fight. People are saying, oh, the data centers are running up my electrical costs. Well, data centers have the power to put their own little nuclear power plant right there in the ground next to them. It's possible. These are small, little self-contained nuclear power plants, and we don't have a single one of them in the United States. France, 80% of its electricity comes from nuclear. 80%. We haven't built a nuclear power plant in decades. Because of, again, NIMBYism. I really want electricity, but not in my backyard. Don't put it in my backyard. I really want this, but don't put it near me. I like streaming King of the Hill on Hulu, but I don't want the data center in my backyard. Put it somewhere else. Well, the energy issue, this NIMBYism. This NIMBYism has put up regulations that prohibit or make it extremely difficult to the fact that it's cost prohibitive to build any of these things. And even if you do get them, the money for them, then you have people saying, well, not in my backyard. I don't want it here. Data centers need constant, reliable power. Not sometimes, not when the wind blows. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, they need power 24/7. Not when the sun's out all the time. But that takes a lot of energy, right? Well, AI data centers currently use about 4% of U.S. electricity. 4%. And even with growth projections, we're talking about 6.5% to 12% by 2028. So we're arguing over something that's a fraction of the total energy use. Let's put that in perspective. Residential homes in America, when we run our air conditioners, when we heat our houses, when we turn the lights on, do our laundry, we use 37% of electricity. Commercials like the Walmart across the street, buildings like that, commercial buildings, 36% of the total. Industrial electrical use is 26%. Transportation is basically nothing. AI data centers, 4%. So the issue isn't that they're using a lot of electricity. Let's focus on the fact that if they wanted to, if they could put their own nuke plant in. They could get their electricity that way and probably sell whatever they weren't using to their neighbors. But there are regulations that prohibit that. So you could be mad at the data center, or you could be mad at the root cause, which is overregulating the United States of America, basically. Well, what about the water? That's something else you'll hear. They use too much water. Yeah, data centers use water for cooling. But systems are becoming more efficient. That's how technology works. And there are systems like closed loop cooling that reduces freshwater use by around 50 to 70%. So the industry is actually solving the problem while critics are describing it. You have people who are out there complaining, and some people are out there solving problems. Now, these hyperscale data centers use like 200 to 1,000 acres. That one in Festus that we were talking about. Sounds big, but they're geographically limited, and they require specific infrastructure, and they're not taking over the country. They're clustering where it makes sense. So the real conflict here seems to be more about energy policy than it is about anything else. So let's worry about how we can free that up. Let's focus on getting regulations out of the way, and let's stop with the NIMBYism. 8:49, this is Duane Lester. We'll be right back. the data center conversation, though, because I think the real issue and the real conflict that people are having with data centers is the idea that they're going to raise their electrical rates. Okay, it's no lie. Data centers need electricity. They need baseload power. They need it constant. They need it 24/7. Right now, natural gas alone supplies about 40% of the electricity for data centers. Forget about renewables. You can't run a data center on part-time power. You can't run it when there's no wind. You can't run it when it's night and there's no solar. But the problem is a lot of states have mandates for renewable energy use. Again, government, it's what government does. It gets in a man's way. It's from the philosopher poet Mao, Captain Mao. Some states have these mandates, and that results in what? Higher costs, grid instability, slower development. So people want the internet, but they don't want the energy that provides it, like nuclear. Well, here's the bigger picture, folks. This isn't really about data centers. It's about whether we allow growth. And that's what I'm asking you right now. Do you want growth? Because more data centers equal more computing power, equal more AI development, more economic growth. If they were announcing that they were putting a data center outside of Maryville, would you oppose that? More economic growth, more jobs. Because data centers, yeah, they're full of computers, but they also are full of water lines, so they need plumbers. They're full of electricity, so they need electricians. They're full of air conditioning systems, so they need HVAC guys. Somebody's got to sweep the floors. All kinds of jobs, all kinds of economic growth. This is not a problem. This is a sign of progress. So if you want AI, you want these streaming platforms, you want Facebook, you want cloud storage, then you want data centers. Stop opposing the infrastructure. Stop opposing the use of the energy or the land. And recognize that it's even bigger than making sure the next episode of Monarch that comes out on Apple TV, which is a great show, by the way. It's bigger than that. It's also about national security. Because I guarantee they aren't having these debates in China. They're just building them wherever they want. And if we allow bad actors like China or Russia to get the lead on that, to get the lead on AI and computing power, folks, that's not the world we want to live in. You've got to allow the footprint, and you've got to get government out of their way. And that's what this comes down to. I'm not saying that the people in Festus shouldn't have lost their jobs. It sounds like those folks in Festus were victims of their own arrogance. This elitist attitude that you see when people get elected to an office and they suddenly think that they know better. We've been talking about that all day. Even with foreign aid, you see this conceit that Frederick Hayek talked about, the fatal conceit where they know best. And then we turn things over to them and they just get in the way. So here's where I land to wrap things up today, folks. Data centers are not the problem. They're a symptom of growth. They're a driver of innovation. They're a foundation of modern life, and they are a national security interest. The real question is, do we want to lead in these areas, or do we want to regulate it away? Because if we restrict energy, if we restrict infrastructure, if we restrict development, we don't stop demand. We just move it somewhere else. And that somewhere else might not be in the best interest of the United States. If we don't build here, it will be built somewhere else, probably with fewer environmental standards and less accountability and less security. So, That's the show for today, folks. It's 8:58. Again, we fight daily for liberty in this world, but remember, ultimate freedom is found in Christ Jesus. So until next time, keep both your liberty and your faith close.